Please proceed.
Okay. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. And basically, I'll be talking about COVID care and oxygen management at home. So, over the last month or even last year, for that matter, I've been coming across, I'm sure everyone has been coming across a lot of people who, are not or you basically asymptomatic cases or somebody, but because of panic, people's again talking that whether should we go to the hospital, is it required, or some logistic reason we have somebody at home, we cannot, we do not want to spread COVID to them. So how do we manage, how should we get admitted, should we not? And apart from that, multiple other questions. Now, I think the biggest challenge that we are facing currently with this whole situation, and I'm sure everyone will agree, is major issues that have arisen is overwhelming burden on the hospital resources, especially the bed, especially the oxygen. So day in day out we keep on reading in the news, and we also keep on seeing in our hospital how there's long waiting list. Apparently some 25-30 waiting list for ward beds is going on, and ICU is even difficult to get into. Daily basis, at least I have some at least 25-30 patients in the wards who actually require ICU care, but because of lack of ICU, so we are somehow managing them in the ward itself. So again, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of crisis going on as far as oxygen requirement, as far as ward beds, or for that matter hospital bed is concerned. So what I'll be doing is I'll be just taking up a few things, because over the last 1 month I have had a lot of patients who've been asking me a lot of questions. So I'll just try and answer all of them to the best of my capabilities. So let's start with that. So first of all, uh, say for example, who is eligible for home care? Now, home care, when we talk about, ideally anyone who requires oxygen, ideally anyone who is having certain symptoms should be sent to a hospital. But what if hospital beds only are not available? Because as you know, in Bangalore, the availability of a hospital bed is 0.3 per 1,000 population. And this is one of the best ratios in the country after Pune. So again, I urge a lot of people, stay at home as far as possible. So when I urge somebody to stay at home, who am I talking about? So all asymptomatic cases, no matter what, should be at home. Apart from that, mild cases without any risk factors, they can be managed at home. Now, what do I mean when I say about mild cases? Mild cases means very mild flu-like symptoms. When we talk about there's a no breathing difficulty, that means only just minor cold cough sort of a thing, some sore throat, or patients may be having a little fever and all, but these patients are not with any risk factors. So what do we mean when we say risk factors? So anyone who's above age 60, is diabetic, is a hypertensive, has other chronic cardiac, liver, kidney, or respiratory diseases, has an underlying malignancy or cancer, old history of stroke, is somebody who is on certain immunosuppressive drugs, such as steroids, such as other drugs for rheumatoid arthritis and all. So all these people, they constitute these things, they constitute high risk factors. So they have documented higher mortality than other people, and hence it is recommended that anyone with these risk factors, even with mild symptoms, ideally be placed in a hospital. But again, this time around, we are triaging patients very strictly, because this time around, the only criteria for getting into a hospital we have made, at least in our hospital, is if you require oxygen. Rest everyone, we are trying to manage as far as possible at home itself. So another question now it comes, say we have told somebody, okay, you be at home. So people ask a lot of questions, what do we do at home? How do we monitor the patient? Okay, how long do we get at home? When do we come to the hospital? So again, very valid questions. And I feel, these questions need to be answered, because overall what I see is a lot of anxiety whenever we tell, okay, you be at home, because people have others at home, there may be elderly people, there may be children at home, and everyone is obviously worried about them. So these questions seem a lot valid at that point. So what all to monitor at home? Basically, one, definitely the symptoms. Okay, symptoms, because usually people have very minor symptoms when we tell them to be at home. But again, at the same time, I tell them, okay, please monitor all your symptoms, especially if you have breathing difficulties, especially if the fever is very high grade and the fever is not resolving. If you have constant cough, if you have certain other symptoms, please keep on monitoring those symptoms and maintain a chart, preferably if you have fever. So maintain a chart of fever, because this time around, this wave is absolutely different from the first wave which we had. This time around, what we are noticing is fever which is staying for a longer duration. Up to 10 to 14 days also fever is coming. Last year on an average it was 5 to 6 days. This time on an average it is about 8 to 10 days, which has become a matter of anxiety for a lot of people. Definitely so, because somebody at home, we tell, okay, you stay at home. I keep on monitoring. At least I have some 60-70 patients who I'm managing at home on daily basis. They keep on asking, okay, fever is coming, what to do? 101, 102 fever is coming, what to do? So main thing is just maintain a log on when the symptoms are coming, fever is coming, what time is it coming, how much is the temperature spike and whatnot, because it can help in understanding quite a bit. Other things to monitor are a pulse oximetry, monitor your oxygen saturation, monitor your heart rate. Now, this is precisely a very simple way to do it. Any handheld pulse oximeters will be able to do that. Another thing which a lot of people don't know, and I will touch upon it, is perform a 6-minute walk test. How to do that? I'll just let you know. So now pulse oximetry at home. So basically, when we say, okay, you monitor your saturations at home, that is because we know that, early dip in saturation sometimes doesn't portend a very good prognosis. So purchasing a pulse oximeter, monitoring saturations at home becomes an important and integral part of COVID monitoring and management at home. However, a word of caution. Because of this pandemic, a lot of companies started producing pulse oximeters in a frenzy, because of which these oximeter devices are not standardized, they are not well calibrated, they are not accurate. I can say that for at least 50% of these devices out there. And when we say monitor your saturation, your normal person's saturation is about 96 and above. However, when we say during COVID, because lungs are affected, we peg your target saturations as anything above 93% is good enough. But here's a big but. If your saturation readings previously were 97, the very next day it is not going above 93. Even 93 can be dreadful in that situation. So it all matters on how much was the earlier value and how much is the value now, how much was a fall. Okay. Still, if the saturations are above 93, no need to panic in that case. A lot of times what happens, patients call in a frenzy. They call at night. They say, okay, doc, saturation has fallen to about 91, 92%. What to do? Now, first things first, do not panic. As I told, a lot of these pulse oximeter devices are not calibrated. In those cases, just remove your pulse oximeter, because if all this while it has been showing good readings and all of a sudden has dipped down, just remove the pulse oximeter, rub your fingers properly, make them warm, and check with at least 1 or 2 different fingers. And make sure to keep your pulse oximeter for a good 2 minutes before noting the final reading. This is because sometimes pulse oximeters do hang up on the reading. Sometimes cold extremities, cold fingers may not give a right reading. If you have applied nail polish or something, it may not give a right reading. So all these factors are there to consider whenever you are noting your pulse oximetry values. Now, if still after doing all this, your saturation is less, I suggest walk for 2-3 minutes and then check your saturations again. So this is basically how a very basic fundamentals of how to check your oxygen saturations and so on and so forth. So coming on to this exercise desaturation test, what I mentioned, that 6-minute walk test, this is also necessary in my opinion, because it can pick up a lot of cases very early in the course who can potentially worsen. So this is something because say, for example, you take a walk, you take a very brisk walk, and after that you check saturation. For a normal person, for a completely uninfected individual, there will be no dip in saturation even after walking continuously, running continuously. Oxygen maintains very well. That's because lungs have a mechanism. The small balloon units, oxygen just goes in and flows into the blood units very easily. However, when the lungs are affected, the junction between your lungs and the blood vessels, it gets affected most commonly. In that case, what happens when you walk and your oxygen requirement increases, the body is not capable of shifting that oxygen to the blood vessels as fast as possible. Hence, sometimes an early indicator can be that your saturation dips after some exercise. So, how to ideally monitor that is check your oxygen levels at complete rest while sitting for a good 10-15 minutes. Check your readings, check your pulse, check your saturation levels. Then start a brisk walk for about 6 minutes. So you can measure any distance, and between that, you just keep on walking briskly for 6 minutes. And as soon as you complete your 6 minutes, recheck your saturation. If your saturation falls by more than 4%, or saturation falls to less than 90%, these are warning signs. These may potentially predict that you may be in it for a long haul. You may require hospitalization in near future. Of course, it's not always true, but it is more often than not. So please make sure that whosoever you come in contact with, whosoever you can educate, make sure that this point is also there. Because in people whose saturation is falling below 90 and by more than 4% after exercising, they will have to be put on a more vigilant pathway. So again, when we say, okay, you monitor yourself at home, there are certain things, definitely, certain signs, certain symptoms, wherein we say, okay, you need to seek help, you need to get yourself hospitalized. So what are these situations? Oxygen saturations less than 92%. Definitely, you require oxygen at that time. Definitely, you will better off in a hospital. Excessive fatigue or drowsiness, okay, normally some kind of fatigue is present, that is inevitable with COVID. However, if there's a lot of fatigue, person is just unable to get out of the bed, it portends a poor prognosis. It may be that the disease activity is actually overwhelming and you need to go to a hospital. If your cough is excessive, non-stop cough, because what happens a lot of times is cough, person starts coughing, 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 which leads to closure of your airways. Airways close, your oxygen levels start falling. So excessive non-stop cough again is a danger sign. Chest pain, because we have seen a lot of times with COVID, there is concomitant, heart conditions also which may be present. Chest pain is important. Another thing, because COVID lungs become weak. So with a lot of cough, sometimes your lungs do rupture. We have seen a lot of instances. We have in fact published a paper also on this. Lungs spontaneously rupture. There is collection of air inside the lung, and most common symptom of that is chest pain. So if you have severe stabbing type of chest pain, please do not ignore. It can be a sign of air inside the lungs. It can be a sign of any cardiac condition. Breathing difficulty. Previously, no breathing difficulty. Now you have started having breathing difficulties. You're breathing very fast. You're not able to take in deep breaths. That again is a warning sign. Any blood in your sputum. Okay, while coughing, because any blood in sputum means that the lungs are badly affected, or it can mean that there is a clot sitting inside the lungs. One symptom not to be ignored. Confused state of mind. Some people may be just so drowsy. You talk to them, they may not be talking sense at that time. Why does that happen? Most common cause of that is low oxygen levels. Not to be ignored, confused state of mind is something which is again a sort of a medical emergency. Please, please, please be aware of that. Coming on to heart rate. Heart rate, again, a simple thing which can be checked on a pulse oximeter. Heart rate either more than 140 or less than 60. Again, these are more common than we think, because we see it in we see all these things day in day out. So this is again something which is not to be ignored, and if you have these sort of things, please seek help at that point of time. So now that, okay, we have seen, okay, patients are at home, we are monitoring at home. But there is a lot of anxiety component related to other people, other members at home. Obviously, because if one person is affected, others are not. So a lot of people do have questions. Okay, how do we take care of such patients? So ideally, a person who is tested positive, who has mild symptoms, or who is rather asymptomatic at that point of time, better is to isolate in a separate room. Okay, now there is a difference between quarantine, there is a difference between isolation. Quarantine is is a very strict form of isolation in which there is minimal to no contact. Isolation, on the other hand, is a little relaxed form of quarantine. So ideally, such patients, if you're managing at home, it has to be, because we don't have quarantine facilities at home, we call it home isolation. So ideally, a separate room has to be provided. Minimal contact whenever is required. Contact should be only while wearing a mask. Say, for example, a person is affected, is sitting in a room. Obviously, you have to feed that person. You get your dinner or something, basically, you just go. But make sure while going, you are wearing a mask at that time. Always maintain at least 6 feet distance between you and the affected person, and reduce the contact time to less than 5 minutes. Why all these things are important? Because COVID virus, as per new evidence, as per all the other overwhelming, studies which are coming in, it is showing that most of the exposure happens because of aerosol. What is aerosol? I speak, some air coming out of my mouth, that is aerosol. Plain and simple as that. Now, these virus particles are small, hence, they are not able to sustain in the air above 6 feet. Therefore, a distance of 6 feet is a safe distance. Second thing, they get suspended in the air, for more than 5 to 10 minutes. If you go the suspension in the air, that also harms you. Hence, contact time less than 5 minutes. And because it's all aerosol, better to be wearing a mask at that time. And now, another question, what sort of a mask should you be wearing? Normally, a simple face mask is good enough. But if you have a person who's actively coughing at home, put a simple cloth mask or a surgical mask on that person. And once you are going into that room, if possible, wear an N95 mask, because this is a respirator, the N95 mask, that filters the air which is coming in. Whereas the surgical mask more or less just prevents the droplets or the aerosols from going out. So that becomes important. A person, the patient himself, may wear a cloth mask, may wear a surgical mask, which prevents the aerosols from going outside, while you, who are non-infected, who are going to be in contact, should wear a N95 if possible. If not, but you are maintaining your less contact time and all, a face mask should be okay in those situations. Another question which we have very commonly is, when should others get tested? Say, for example, somebody at my home developed symptom. We got him tested, and he has come out to be positive. Other people do have this query. Should we get tested? When do we get tested? Now, the usual period of infectivity is 1 to 3 days prior to the patient's symptoms, and this can extend up to 10 days later. So these 12 to 13 days are actually period of maximum infectivity. So if you cross this, then there is no need for you to get tested. A person who has already crossed 10 days of his symptoms, you don't need to be worried at that point of time. However, this is the period when anyone is likely to be more infectious, and this is the window. If you have come in contact with a person during this time, then we may think of getting you tested. Now, should you really get tested in such situations? Now, definitely all symptomatic contacts should get tested. One. Second thing, for other asymptomatic contacts, testing is very voluntary. If you don't have any symptoms at all, you may actually forego a testing. But what I advise is, any patient with risk factors, even though if you are asymptomatic, please get yourself tested. The reason for that is, if you have any of those risk factors which we discussed earlier, you are highly likely that in near future, in the next 5 to 7 days, you may develop symptoms. And sometimes, especially in this way, we have seen it may follow a very aggressive course. We have seen patients worsening overnight. person sitting absolutely fine with 97 saturation, 23-year-old, this is what I'm talking about, in the next 24 to 48 hours is on 10 liters, in the next 24 hours is on a ventilator currently at my hospital. So this is the thing that we talk about. So anyone with risk factors, please get yourself tested, even if you're asymptomatic. For others, I will leave it up to you. It doesn't really make a difference. So am I okay so far? Any doubts so far? Anyone?
It's good, doctor.
Sure.
We can take the Q&A at the end of the session.
Okay. So now what is the duration of this isolation period or the quarantine period? Now the period of infectivity is usually, as we just discussed, 10 days from symptom onset. Say for example, today, now what do you say a symptom onset? A lot of people like to call it, okay, I started with my fever on so and so day. Some people say, okay, I started with some sore throat on some day. So any symptom for that matter, whenever it starts, from that period, you have to take 10 days. 99.5% patients become non-infective after a period of 10 days. This is seen with the help of something called as viral cultures. Now, when we talk about culture is something gold standard, meaning you take a swab, you allow the virus to grow. On the other hand, the test that we do, RT-PCR, just is a swab, and that is a very rapid test. You can detect DNA on that. Now, RT-PCR may still be positive. However, cultures become negative in 99.5% cases after 10 days. However, to be on safer side, the recommended duration of quarantine is still 14 days, because it is said that up to 99.9% patients become non-infective till that time. So what is the duration of isolation period from your symptom onset? 14 days. That's it. However, this is again not entirely true. As I said, 0.1% of cases can still be infected, and this is especially true of some severe cases. Like somebody who requires oxygen may be infected for a period of up to 15 days also. For all other purposes, it's usually 14 days wherein you can come out of your isolation, wherein you can mingle with your family, you can mingle with others, obviously with certain precautions. But most of these people become non-infectious. So this is also one of the most common questions that we get, that should we get a repeat test? A lot of patients in the hospital also, relatives ask that, okay, when are you going to repeat a test? Because we need to get the person home, we need to make necessary arrangements. Now, there is no need for a repeat test unless required for office or your traveling purposes or something else. It is not required. Now, last year when COVID hit everyone, everywhere, basically there was this norm that you get an RT-PCR, you get admitted to a hospital. Discharge from a hospital will be only when you have at least 2 tests negative. What that saw was people staying in the hospital for up to 2 months, 3 months also. Then they found out this thing that after 10 days there, most of your cultures become negative, but RT-PCR can be persistently positive for up to 3 months. Now, what's the reason for that is it detects DNA from the virus. Even dead viruses shed DNA, which can be picked up by the test. Think of it like a human body. A dead human body also you can do DNA analysis on. Similarly, a dead virus inside your respiratory tract also sheds DNA, which can be picked up by the test. And this may show a false positive result for up to 3 months. Therefore, a repeat test is not required unless you want it for certain logistical reasons. Therefore, 14 days from symptom onset, majority become COVID negative, and you can assume safely that a person is no longer infectious to others. So no need to get a repeat test. Now the question is, okay, I'm monitoring a patient at home, I'm treating somebody at home, but what if your oxygen level falls suddenly? Okay, there is definitely a lot of anxiety in those cases. People do panic all of a sudden, saturations falling to 88%, saturations falling to as low as 80% in that case. First of all, seek urgent medical help and try and get yourself admitted to a hospital. This is obviously after rechecking your oxygen saturation properly, whether this reading is right or not. Because a lot of times we get people, we get calls that saturations level are so and so. We tell them, okay, come to the hospital, come to the emergency. When we check here properly with our pulse oximeter, saturation is right, 96, 97. So make sure the reading is correct. If it is actually low, please seek urgent medical help and come try and get admitted to a hospital. In the meanwhile, there are certain things, because it's not like, okay, now your saturation falls, in the next 5 minutes, you are in the hospital. What to do in the meanwhile? Meanwhile, there are certain measures which can help you pick up your oxygen levels or at least build up lung capacity. One of the most important things is to sleep on your stomach as long as possible. Second is perform certain deep breathing exercises. Now, what do I mean by these deep breathing exercises? I will go on to that. So these patients now, say for example, you require oxygen, you require a hospital bed, but you are not able to find it, because this has been one of the major travesties that we have, gone through this pandemic. Currently, the situation might be cooling down a bit, but still finding a hospital bed is a nightmare. So how do we monitor these patients, or, take care of such patients at home? First of all, if you're unable to find a bed with low oxygen level, try and source an oxygen device if possible. There are 2 or 3 different categories of oxygen devices. There can be oxygen concentrators, there can be oxygen cylinders. Perform awake proning. As I said, sleep on your stomach. Perform deep breathing exercises. Seek medical help. Get in touch with your doctor and ask for a change in medication. Obviously, the doctor himself knows that your certain medications may need to be changed. Currently, I am managing at least 27 patients with oxygen at home, 5 patients on home ventilators. So all these things are there because we keep in touch with these patients on regular basis. Monitoring becomes important for such patients. In the meanwhile, please keep looking for a hospital bed, and most importantly, do not panic. Why I keep saying this, do not panic, is because there's physiology to it. Once you become anxious, your breathing becomes erratic. You start breathing. So if you see the amount of air that is going in is not able to penetrate your lungs fully. It doesn't go inside. It doesn't bring in oxygen with that, doesn't wash out your carbon dioxide. Your oxygen levels do start falling. So whatever it is, I mean, I know it's a natural response, but try as far as possible, do not panic. So what is meant by proning really? So in simple terms, it is sleeping on your tummy. So this improves your overall lung capacity by bringing in the reserve. I'll just tell you very briefly. So normally when we are sitting upright or when we are sleeping on our back, the front portion of our lungs, they are mostly active. In 90-95% people, 95% of your lung capacity is brought in by the front part of the lungs. The back part, the lower part of the lungs, they are actually collapsed. They are fresh. So what you do is when you lie down on your back, these parts which are previously collapsed, they open up and help in improving your oxygen levels, while the affected front part of the lungs can be rested till that time. So this improves your overall lung capacity, will improve your oxygenation. So you ideally have to follow a 2-2-hour cycle. What do I mean by a 2-2-hour cycle? So this is just a diagram of that. First 2 hours, lie on your belly, sleep completely on that. You may use a couple of pillows to just help you maintain that position. After 2 hours, lie on your right side or your left side. Then next 2 hours is sitting up position, slight reclining position. Next 2 hours is lying on your left side, and so on and so forth. So continue with this cycle if your oxygen levels are on the lower side. This will really help in bringing in those unused lung units, which can really help in improving your overall oxygen concentration and improving your lung capacity. Another thing is, what do you mean by these deep breathing exercises? I advise a lot of people, go for yoga, go for pranayam. Now, these may not have any scientific evidence, but we have seen these, because studies are not done, but we have seen that these exercises do help. Another one of the most common, important, or easy to perform exercises is pursed lip breathing. So I've put in as a diagram over here. What you have to do is sit upright, take in a deep breath through your nostril, as deep as you can. Once it is in, count 3 breaths inside, hold it, and then breathe out like you're blowing out a candle and empty your lungs as much as possible. This exercise you repeat over a 15-minute cycle and continue and perform this at least 6 to 7 times a day. This will really help in opening those collapsed lung units and consequently improving your oxygen levels. Another important exercise is this device over here, which is called the incentive spirometry exercise. Now, this is a simple device. It is available as 2 or 3 different devices. Either it may be available like this, which is the most common device with 3 balls there and a tubing. Keeping upright, you just have to inhale inside and the balls start going up. Once the balls start going up, try and hold your breath for a second or two. Try and hold the balls up there. After 5 counts, repetitions, you hold it upside down. In that case, you have to blow inside and then the balls start going up. So again, 5 counts on either side. Ideally, do these exercises once every 2 hours. This will really help with the overall lung capacity and thereby your oxygenation. Make sure to do that. Coming on to oxygen devices. Now, oxygen devices, as I said, there are 1 or 2 different types. Now, there's oxygen cylinders, there's oxygen concentrators. Among cylinders, also there's available in varying capacities. There may be if you go and purchase those, they will ask you, okay, what type of a cylinder? T type, E type, M type cylinder. Multiple are there. It all just basically a term for their capacity. These are easy to use, definitely. Just like a plug and play device, you just connect a tubing, turn on the knob to a desired level and start taking in oxygen. What are the advantages of an oxygen cylinder as compared to your oxygen concentrator? One, it delivers 100% pure oxygen. Second, it is cheaper, especially if you're considering for a short-term use. It definitely comes in cheaper than an oxygen concentrator. However, the biggest disadvantage which limits its use is refilling of the cylinder, and it is not really portable. Third thing is, you never really know when your oxygen cylinder may run out of the gas, and in that case you may be in for a real trouble. So these are the things which you have to take in mind whenever you're going for an oxygen device. What you are taking for, you should know that device in and out. What to do in case you run out of oxygen, what to do in case it's not functioning. So everything becomes important. So this is just a basic diagram of an oxygen cylinder. So usually if you see this particular area, just a minute. So if you see this particular area, so this has to be opened with the help of a wrench or something. And then your pressure gauge will tell you how much oxygen is there ideally in a cylinder. So whenever you buy a cylinder, you ask the vendor that, okay, how much this should be within, and when do we say the cylinder is completely empty, or at what level should you be alerted when to take a new cylinder or something. Now, this is the flow regulator knob. Now, this is actually not available in multiple cylinders. There may be a different device called as a flow meter, which is, you see in the hospitals also. Essentially, the knob is the same. In this one, the level is given here only. In the other ones, flow meter has that 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. You just connect the oxygen tubing over here and open the knob, and you're good to go in that case. Another device that has been coming a lot in the news and all so far is oxygen concentrator. Now, this is really a good device. We have been using these devices since the last many years, almost 10-15 years now, because we have other sets of patients, interstitial lung disease, COPD, and all other sort of patients, in which these devices do come in handy. Major advantages: very portable. Okay, they have wheels, so if you want to carry it to the washroom, you want to carry it to some other place, you can actually do that. And they run on electricity, so there is no need for refilling, which saves a lot of time, which saves a lot of effort, which saves a lot of anxiety also, because you never know when your cylinder is going to run out of oxygen. Disadvantage: definitely limited capacity. Okay, because these devices, what they do is they entrap the atmospheric air. They try and concentrate it by removing most of the nitrogen and pumping in oxygen. So their capacity is limited, because after all, these are just small units. So they may be 5 or 10 liter capacity. But when we talk about managing at home, definitely somebody who is on 5 liters, up to 5 liters of oxygen, can be safely managed at home. Above 5 liters, we do not recommend to be at home, because that means your requirement is so high. That means there is something very wrong with you and you need to be in a hospital. Another thing, they cannot run continuously for 24 hours. They run on electricity. They have a filter out there. They have a processor out there. So if you keep it running for 24 hours, they tend to get heated up and they may burst. So this is one thing which you need to be very sure of. Also, they do not deliver 100% oxygen as an oxygen cylinder, because cylinders are directly filled at source with proper oxygen gas, because these oxygen concentrators entrap atmospheric air, which is only 21% oxygen. They try to put it. So at best, these oxygen concentrators may vary anywhere from 85 to 98% oxygen levels. So if you put an oxygen concentrator at 2 liters, if you put an oxygen cylinder at 2 levels, the amount of oxygen you will be getting will be definitely higher with the help of a cylinder rather than a concentrator. But that doesn't mean this is something which should discourage you from buying a concentrator, because as I said, most important thing is it runs on electricity and doesn't require refilling. So usually what we recommend people is to buy a concentrator wherever possible. Now, this is just a few steps on how to use an oxygen concentrator. I'm pretty sure that you can actually share these all slides and all if required for later purpose. So this, I just prepared a flyer for BBMP as well. So this is a concentrator that we use at home more regularly. This is one by Philips. And so first is position the concentrator always approximately 1 to 2 feet from the wall, because there is an outlet and exhaust which needs to function properly. Connect this humidification bottle. This is the humidification bottle over here. So there's no back view to it. This is usually filled with water. Now make sure the air filters are also in place. Now there will be a filter somewhere on the bottle, on the concentrator. Make sure that's in place. Now finally attach this oxygen tubing, this label number 5 over here. This is the oxygen tubing which usually goes from the humidifier bottle. Start your oxygen concentrator at least 15 to 20 minutes before using it by plugging in the power cord. So there are two things. One, the power cable. Second, the switch. So turn this on. You may not turn the switch on. So main thing is to power on the machine first, because it takes time to heat up. The concentrator starts running, it starts trapping in the atmospheric air. So all of a sudden, if you just put and then switch it on, initially you will not get oxygen. Initially, it will all be just like breathing in room air. It will be like that. After this, just switch on the power button, fit your nasal cannula. Now this is just a representative image of a nasal cannula. You normally bring it above, front of it, put it behind your ears and tighten it along your chin. Insert these cannulae into your nostrils and then adjust this particular knob to your desired level, to the prescribed level rather. So as I said, there are two different types of machines, either a 5-liter capacity or a 10-liter capacity. So howsoever much required, you can go for that much oxygen in that case. Again, questions, what are the measures to take while using oxygen? Now we prescribe oxygen. Okay, now there are certain practical issues. Say, for example, you are continuously requiring about 4 liters, 5 liters oxygen. Without oxygen, your saturation drops down to 80 to 83%. Now, definitely you have to do certain other activities. You have to eat, you have to go to a washroom, you have to do certain other things. What to do in that case? Now, always titrate your oxygen level. That is, use the knob to turn it around to reduce it or increase it to maintain your target saturation levels between 92 and 94%. Higher oxygen levels do not help more. It is a drug. Oxygen is a drug. Like with any other drug, giving more may not necessarily make it better. In fact, it may have certain adverse events. So there was a latest study which was published in one of the reputed journals, which actually said if you maintain your saturation levels between 92 and 95, you have a mortality benefit rather if you keep it around 97, 98%. Because what happens is, even if you give more oxygen, these oxygen molecules, they disintegrate into certain molecules which can cause free radical damage to your lungs and cause further inflammation out there. So try and keep your oxygen settings to the lowest required levels, which can help you maintain between this target range of saturation. Please use a longer tubing and use oxygen while exertion. This is important. So this is most commonly possible when you are using a concentrator. You can use the wheels to roll in your concentrator, and with a long tubing, you can use your restroom. You can use it while bathing, while certain activities and all. Another thing is what type of interface you use. Now, there's something called as oxygen mask. There's something called as nasal cannula. Now, if by rule you are requiring more than 4 or 5 liters of oxygen, use a face mask. If you are requiring less than 4 liters of oxygen, use a nasal cannula. Again, I recommend using a nasal cannula, especially because it is much more easier to, while eating as well. Because what happens if you're putting on a face mask and you have to eat, definitely you will keep on removing the face mask during that valuable time your oxygen level dips down. So better to use a nasal cannula or a nasal prong, what I just showed in this picture. This one, you use that while eating especially. Keep a track of your oxygen requirement. Maintain a chart. Okay, like for example, maintain your saturations every 2 to 4 hours when you are using oxygen at home, and maintain a chart of that. At this point of time, this much oxygen I was giving, and this was the saturation at this point of time. So what you can do is you can track it very easily, whether your oxygen requirement is actually going up, it is steady, or is it coming down. If it is coming down, good sign. If it is going up slightly, be aware and try and get a hospital as soon as possible. There are certain categories of patients who are discharged from home, from the hospital on home on oxygen. We do have a lot of patients because again, these patients who normally when we talk about COVID or COVID infection, how the graph usually goes, initial first 5-6 days, first 7 days is usually the viral phase. In that case, the virus comes into the body, it tries and attaches to multiple different cells of the body and causes, infection, the minor symptoms that you have at that point of time. During the second phase, 7th day, 6th day onwards, your body starts fighting the virus. So body starts fighting the virus, it causes release of a lot of chemicals which help in this whole process. These chemicals do cause a lot of damage to your own body as well. That is why this second week is usually when we say your symptoms may worsen. Think of it like two people fighting. We see a lot of movies and all, two people who are fighting, there's a lot of collateral damage, there's a lot of furniture which may be broken. Similarly, inside your lungs, your bacteria or your virus is there, your body starts fighting the virus, there's a lot of damage to the surrounding tissue. So this is usually the second phase. This damage keeps on going. Once it plateaus down to a normal level, after that comes your healing phase. So one good thing about these patients who are discharged with home oxygen is that they are now in healing phase. So these patients will remain more or less stable. Up to 95 of these patients remain stable and eventually come off oxygen. While on the other end of the spectrum, people who require hospitalization, who are in their first phase, they are somebody who need to be monitored more vigilantly. So principle of oxygen management remain the same at home. Whatever we discussed, use oxygen as long as possible. Use oxygen while exerting yourself. If you're using a concentrator, do not keep it on continuously for more than, for 24-hour periods. Ideally, what you need to do is 6 hours oxygen concentrator, switch it off for half an hour. Again, 6 hours, switch it off for half an hour. So if you give this cooling period to your oxygen concentrator, it will long last, it will work better in that case. After discharging from home, your rehabilitation measures become more important than just oxygen measurement. What are these rehabilitative measures? This comprises of deep breathing exercises, your limb exercises, your physiotherapy, and everything. Believe me, I have been consulting, I have been managing patients on home ventilators as well who were discharged last year after a period of stay of 3 months, up to 3 months at the hospital. Finally, we send these patients home on home ventilators as well. And last week, I just got call from one such patient that now he's completely off oxygen. He's completely without a ventilator, without anything, walking, talking, everything. So it really feels good, when such patients come out of a very severe disease. But majorly rehabilitation is important afterwards. Stay in touch with your doctor. Okay, at least one consultation every fifth day or as and when required. This is equally important because sometimes, you don't know whether you're using oxygen right or not, whether your levels are maintaining right or not. Make sure that you are in touch with your doctor who can help troubleshoot as much as possible. Again, remember, oxygen is a drug. Titrate it to the lowest required dose and discontinue as early as possible and maintain your levels between 92 and 94%. Anyways, once you have become affected, if your lungs have been affected and you are being discharged on home oxygen, that definitely means your lung capacity has actually come down, because there's a lot of scarring which happens and these scars heal over time. So till that time, now if your initial oxygen level was 97, post COVID it is 94, that means your, in a way, your thermostat has been reset to a lower level and eventually it will go up. What will take you there is certain measures: lie on your tummy, do certain deep breathing exercises, do other physiotherapy and other exercises. This will help you quite a bit, and most importantly, do not panic. So just to summarize, no need for hospitalization for all and every positive case. Do not panic. Anxiety reduces oxygen level, precipitates inflammation. Early prone positioning does help. Deep breathing exercises do aid in improving your oxygenation. Seek medical help early. Get in touch with your doctor. And remember, let's help patients who actually require hospital care. Let's not overburden our healthcare resources. Let's try and manage everyone who can be managed at home, and let's try and create more awareness. It's all about finding calm in this chaos. Thank you.
Wow. That was a real insightful session, Dr. We learned a lot about oxygen concentrators. We were hearing about it. I'm sure all the participants have got benefited. We still have about 15-20 minutes time. If you have that time, I'm sure there are a lot of questions out there. We would request people to raise hands, and then one by one we can go ahead. There are one or two questions in the chat window as well, which I can just take on one of
Sure,
them.
please.
What is the, I'll go from the last, right? What is the chance of kids below 18 years getting COVID?
So there is a good chance. See, actually, now what happens with kids is kids do get COVID. It's not like they don't get COVID. And kids, as such, because they cough a lot, kids usually do not maintain cough hygiene. Kids are somebody who can spread infections quite much more than adults, for that matter. However, till the date, probably just one instance around the world of a kid getting severe illness, that is anyone below 18 years old getting severe illness, but eventually that person also recovered. So far there have not been any instance wherein a child is developing severe illness and going to a hospital, getting admitted, or there has been a demise. It is not there. It is more like normal flu like symptoms in these children, which are self-limiting and resolve usually with a median period of about 5 to 6 days.
Yeah. Thank you. And there are a few other questions. The next one, Shri, can you please go ahead and ask your question? Unmute yourself.
Yeah. Thanks, doctor. I mean, this is really insightful and very informative. I thank for you that. My question is, what is the ratio of doctor and patient at this today's situation? I'm talking about the Karnataka situation. I mean, Bangalore situation.
Right.
To be practical.
See, it's again a very difficult question to answer. Now I'll just share example, because again I don't know the exact numbers, because when we talk about India as such, the doctor to patient ratio is actually pretty poor. I mean, it's a very varied thing, because urban areas the ratio is still very good, because Bangalore as such, health infrastructure wise, is much more geared up, much more prepared than the rest of the country, probably next to only Pune. But again, what is the actual ratio? We don't know. And when we talk about doctor to patient ratio, in that we usually consider all the doctors, right? But in this pandemic, what we have seen is a lot of people are actually not working. Say, for example, orthopedicians are not working. They are not working. These surgeons are not working. Neurologists are not working. So what we have done in our thing is we have repurposed all these doctors. They help in different situations. While we have formed a group of doctors, we have trained everyone to take care of COVID patients. So if you ask me, the doctor to patient ratio has actually fallen down drastically from what it was to pre-COVID levels as well. So that is something which we are struggling really hard with.
Okay, thanks, doctor. Gopal Krishna, can you go next?
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Hello, doctor.
Yeah,
there is in the news regarding this 2DG, which is helping in increasing the oxygen levels, and it's going to help you to bring back normal in a couple of days. Is what the information we read it from the news and everything. Could you please throw some light on that? What is the 2DG and is it really helpful?
Yeah, so see, the thing is, yesterday itself, I had a talk on this thing. So basically, this 2DG drug, this is just a congener of your glucose. Okay, it goes into the cells. It basically, see, any part of your, or any cell, any bacteria, any virus which is metabolically very active, that is, it is continuously dividing, replicating, that will have high nutrient requirement, and nutrition is usually with the help of glucose. Now, this particular drug is a congener of glucose. It goes specifically into these cells and stops the whole metabolism cycle for these particular cells, thereby depriving them of energy and ultimately leading them to die. But how far this will be helpful is a big question mark. Because till yesterday only we were going, we were searching online for all these resources, because every drug has to come in through proper channels. There have to be multiple tests and all. Frankly speaking, I did not find much information about this drug on the internet, despite extensive searches and all. And something which is not as transparent, I really don't know how much it will be useful, because I don't know what is the efficacy of that drug. Second thing is, this particular drug was tried, or was tested last year around June. And the wave that we are seeing this time around, it's completely different. Last year, remdesivir was working. This year, we are seeing no matter who you give, they may survive, may not survive, irrespective of whether they got remdesivir or not. So again, role of 2DG, not really clear whether it will be helpful or not, unless we try. And side effects are also too much. And plus, the drug they tested in was all in non-diabetics, was all in non-kidney disease, non-such basically patients without any of these severe comorbidities and all. So again, that makes its use a little questionable.
How about the plasma therapy also? They have discontinued, remdesivir discontinued, and
it's not like it is discontinued. See, select patients, they may have benefit. Okay, if you take a whole population, so human body has always been such an intriguing phenomena. Okay, two people who are living together, one may get a disease, one may not get disease, one may get very severe, one may not. Similarly, for drugs also, it's like that. It is very individualized thing. Okay, in some people it may actually work. For example, plasma therapy, the basic of plasma is that you have preformed antibodies in those. So by logic, it should help in those people who are not able to mount their own response. So people who have been on chemotherapy, who have some chronic kidney disease, all the patients we have seen, it actually works. But when we took our data as a whole from Apollo Hospital and we analyzed it, we did not see much of a difference. So again, it's basically, some people it might work, some people it might not. So again, it's not a very standardized form of therapy. But we still feel, because last year we had the only paper from India which was published to an international journal on remdesivir, because we had studied this, it actually worked. But this time around, I'm not really sure.
Thanks, doctor.
Yeah. Moving on, I think there are a few more hands that have been raised. Sorry, what? Participants. So, Sudhir, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Good morning, doctor. First of all, thank you very much for a good insight on oxygen and oxygen concentrator. A couple of questions, if I may ask.
Yes,
one is in the comorbidity list you mentioned about respiratory ailments. So what is the boundary of ailments? Like, is it just asthma or higher level of respiratory infection? So when do we say, okay, this person is having a respiratory ailment and should be treated differently?
See, it's basically any respiratory illness. Okay, when I mention chronic respiratory disease, so that encompasses everything, right from your asthma, right from your smoking related disorders. So any basically thing which has been any condition which you have, which is there with you since the last 1 year or more, and you have been taking regular medications for that. So that is when we say you have a chronic respiratory illness. Now, most of these conditions, any chronic condition for that matter, you have to continue with your medications. Only thing it portends is that these people become slightly on the higher risk side as compared to people without any chronic conditions.
Thanks. And my second question would be, we in our apartment are using concentrators and have made it available for some of our residents when during their emergencies. So I heard you mention that based on the requirement. So if your requirement is more than 10 liters, then don't just rely on a concentrator. You need to get admitted. So now, how do I decide that, okay, what is the requirement? So if the requirement is say 5 liter, then I can use the concentrator. But if it is beyond that, so how do I arrive at that requirement of oxygen in terms of liters?
Yeah, so it's all about, see, you, as I told you, when using a concentrator. So initially, obviously, when your oxygen saturations are tipping, first thing to do is to get oxygen, okay, wherever possible. Now you hook up the oxygen, you place those nasal prongs and everything, and then you turn on the machine. Meanwhile, just put a pulse oximeter on your finger. Now, whichever level you feel, okay, your oxygen saturations are maintaining between 92 and 95%. Now that level can be 1 liter for some people, can be 2 liters for some people. However, if you're not able to maintain that level even after, say, raking it up to 5 liters, 6 liters, that means definitely your requirement is very high, and you are probably not a person or not a patient to be managed at home safely, and you have a very good chance of worsening very rapidly. So in those cases, if your saturation is not being maintained between this range, above 92 or so, even with 5 liters, 6 liters of oxygen, that is a surrogate marker that your requirement is high, basically.
Okay. Thank you very much. And once again, thank you very much for fighting this battle for us.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Doctor, there are few questions on the chat window. Is there a danger in using concentrator or cylinder by untrained persons?
No, see, definitely. So few precautions. One of them is never keep it near a source of fire. Okay, because oxygen is a combustible agent. So always keep it. So I used to work in Bombay. So Bombay, the problem is, a lot of people do have these one-room kitchens and all that, and we used to prescribe them. So the whole thing is, if you have a separate kitchen, then it's okay to keep an oxygen concentrator. It is usually safe because I've never been prescribing oxygen concentrators since the last 10-15 years, haven't come across any incidents as such. More or less, it's safe to use as long as you keep it away from a fire source.
Thanks. And why does O2 fall in the evening?
So it's normal body's parameters. So what happens is, room temperature goes down in the evening. Your body temperature tends to rise during the evening because of, hormonal changes and all. So what happens because of the discordance between your body and the room temperature, the what you call windpipe, they start narrowing a little bit. Because of this, sometimes some variation may happen, but if you're constantly using it, it doesn't really make a difference. And also, usually the oxygen levels may not really fall in the evening. So that is again a myth. If you check your saturations properly, it doesn't really fall. In people who do have symptoms, say if your cough increases at that time because of the cold weather or something, then your oxygen levels may dip, but otherwise it usually does not.
Yeah, there are times. Gattu, do you want to go next? Hope, doctor, you have another 10-15 minutes. It's a nice, interesting topic. We wouldn't be able to catch up on you again. So
Sure,
is it okay
no
for another
problem.
15-20 minutes? A few
Okay,
more
sure.
questions?
I think around 11:50 am I okay? Then I have to enter my ICU.
Fine.
One question, doctor. Could you please let us know the reasons of this black fungus?
So yeah, now this black fungus, so this is basically the technical term for that is mucor. Now we used to see these cases earlier also, but mostly in a subset of population who used to be chronically on steroids, especially when your sugars are not very well controlled. This is what we are seeing in this wave of pandemic also. Patients are being indiscriminately put up on steroids. Now, first wave, because not a lot of doctors were practicing, only select few were there who were actually fighting the whole thing, who were actually prescribing medicines. So steroids were still very regulated. This year around, so much indiscriminate use of steroids. Now, second thing is, even if you're giving steroids, you have to keep a watch on your sugars. Steroids do cause do cause your sugars to shoot up. significantly, and if you do not maintain your sugars properly, you are at very high risk of developing this black fungus or any other fungal infection for that matter. So that is one thing which you have to be a little wary about, monitor your sugars well, because COVID itself shoots up your sugars. Steroids on top of that will provide that stimulus.
Thanks, doctor. There is a question that the infection is now airborne. Can one get infected sitting at home and not getting exposed outside home?
It's nothing of that sort. See, again, it's a big mystery how people are getting infected. Definitely more and more evidence is towards it is that infection route is mostly airborne and not droplet or the surface droplets as much. But still we have patients, elderly people who are sitting at home completely shut off, nobody coming in, going out, no house helps, nothing, and still they are coming to us with COVID. So, I mean, the only thing that is up to us is basically taking as much precautions as you can, wearing a mask, definitely not sitting at home, but whenever you're going out, maintain social distance, practice some hand hygiene and all that. And I think remaining whatever has to happen will happen. So not really sure on how people are getting affected despite sitting at home as well.
Yeah. How do you monitor your sugar during the steroid treatment at home?
So there's simple glucometers which are there. So, all the diabetics, they usually have these glucometers at home with simple strips. You just prick your tip of the finger slightly and, it goes onto that strip and gives your sugar level right there. So that is how you have to monitor your sugar levels. And good sugar control is, anything fasting level below 140 is usually good sugar control. If it is in the very high range, say 180 and above, then your chances of developing secondary infections do go up. So that is the thing. So better to monitor your sugars as and when possible.
Yeah, Amit, do you want to go next?
Sure. Good morning, doctor.
Morning.
I live in a community. We have close to 30 apartments, flats, and we have a party hall, a community hall. As a first aid, would you recommend we leverage that place till we get a hospital allotment to use an oxygen concentrator and few first aid for people who are, diagnosed with COVID?
No, see, definitely that would be a good initiative, in my opinion, because, but I think you'll just have to, see the situation now, because what we are seeing, the numbers are falling drastically. So I believe with the lockdown being extended, probably you will have, say, for example, another 3 to 4 days, the number of cases which are getting infected on daily basis will be as much, which the existing infrastructure can possibly absorb. But definitely setting up such a thing, always having some oxygen concentrators lying around will be a good idea, which will help people from your community in that case, till the time they find a bed. Because as I mentioned earlier, it's not like here your saturation falls and the next minute you'll end up in a hospital. So till that time, it will definitely be beneficial.
Thank you, doctor. Thanks for the wonderful session.
Sure.
Yeah, the next question is whether COVID induces diabetes.
COVID doesn't induce diabetes as such, but COVID does disrupt your sugar levels. Okay. And that can predispose you to developing diabetes. So a lot of people who are actually pre-diabetics or whose sugar control, or diabetics whose sugar control initially was good, so it may get very disrupted. Even normal people also, their sugars do go up. One, because of COVID itself. Second, because of, steroid usage whenever required. So yes, definitely this is something which needs to be looked at, which needs to be monitored, and which needs to be taken care of in a better way.
There's a nice question for you. Doctor, can we teleconsult you? Kindly advise.
So you may. So currently I am doing teleconsultations via this Apollo 24/7 app. So I usually have around 1 or 2 hours of consultation time over there, but there's an excellent team we have running at Apollo Jayanagar. So comprising of 3 or 4 of us pulmonologists, and all of us trained in critical care as well. So you can get in touch with us through that platform. We are also planning to launch an initiative sort of thing for all patients who are on home oxygen, home BiPAPs and home ventilators. Since we've been doing this for quite some time. So we are planning to do sort of a venture in that case, just try and help out these patients. So once that is also set up and ready to roll out, probably I can share the details with you.
Yeah. There is another question which says, what is happy hypoxia? I don't know. I've heard for the first
So
time.
happy hypoxia, basically hypoxia is a term given when your oxygen level goes below 92% or so. Happy hypoxia was a term given with COVID because, you know, last year there was not much understanding and everyone was speculating this happens, that happens. Happy hypoxia is usually because when your oxygen level goes down, normally you feel very breathless, you feel tired. So but in case of COVID, what we saw was even people sometimes sitting with 50%, 60% oxygen saturation levels, they were absolutely fine. Like nothing has really happened. And we used to get scared looking at their saturation levels. So this was typically termed as happy hypoxia, meaning your oxygen level is okay, but clinically you feel absolutely fine.
Okay. Sangeeta, would you like to go next?
Hello.
Yes, please.
Sangeeta, would you like to go next? We have another 5 more minutes. Let's quickly.
Can I ask a question? This is Ram.
Yes, please.
Yeah, can I also ask a question, Dev?
Yeah, one more thing, like,
yes, please go
like we are seeing this COVID symptoms in category wise. So, like, ideally, when we should actually go for a checkup or go for a RT-PCR test for COVID, because now what it is happening when we want RT-PCR tests, they are like a categories that are coming in the diagnostic centers. So what exact category we need to see for these COVID for testing?
Right. See, why this was actually instituted in the first place was because, you know, there was a rush of people going in for COVID testing. Which led to delayed results, which led to a shortage in the kits. That is why they said that, you know, okay, if you have particular symptoms only, then you come. Now, again, this particular way, we are seeing that RT-PCR is not as sensitive also like it was last year. In fact, the sensitivity of, I would rather say, sensitivity of rapid antigen test has come up as compared to your RT-PCR. So if you can go for either of these tests. Now, again, if you have any symptom, basically, I would say definitely if you have fever or excessive cough or breathing difficulty, go for the test. Other things, you know, mild fatigue and some sore throat and all, you can still wait if you know they are not allowing you to get yourself tested. That would be my take on it.
You know, I mean, cough in the sense, as you mentioned, like what kind of a dry cough or a wet cough?
It's nothing of that sort. See, any sort of cough, because currently in current situation, you have to assume that all these symptoms, you know, any sort of cough, any sort of runny nose, any sort of your fever is mostly because of COVID. So it doesn't really make a difference, Ram, whether it's a dry cough, whether it's a wet cough sort of thing.
But even after RT-PCR also it came negative, then, and even then also we have like cough symptoms and all. Then what is the reason then?
No, nothing. Just treat it symptomatically. Don't get fixated on the negative result also, because you know you have to you have to understand that the sensitivity for all these tests is maximum 70 to 75%. Okay, they range anywhere from 35 to 75%. Meaning, even if you have COVID, actually, if you have COVID, there is good 25 to 50% chance that your test may come out to be negative. So in that case, you just need to monitor your symptoms, treat it symptomatically, and in case, you know, the symptoms increase, then go for a repeat testing or probably, if required, if advisable, a CT scan.
Thanks.
Can I ask a question?
Srividya here.
Yeah, sorry.
Srividya, can you go next?
Yeah, a good question on the concentrator. Like,
Yes.
Are you supposed to use only distilled water or filtered water for the concentrator?
It's nothing of that sort. See, the whole thing, why this thing came into picture, because in hospitals also we have these humidifiers and all, okay, the bottle wherein you put water. The whole point is definitely if you use distilled water, that is the best, okay, but you cannot lay your hands on distilled water that easily. So what you can do is probably boil the water and use it. Now, why this is, again, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. The only thing is, water, if it is kept in that bottle for a long time and it comes through this humidifier, it can cause some secondary infections, especially if you're already immunocompromised with all the steroids, with all the infection and all. So as far as possible, I mean, simple way to use it will be just boil the water, cool it down, and then use it in those humidifiers. Not always distilled water is required.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Lalita, can I take a question?
Please go ahead.
Doctor, one more question. Like,
hello, yes.
Okay. Yeah, there is a patient who was asking a question, like he has been recovered from 1 month since he was COVID, and he's planning for a baby. Like he was asking like whether I should plan, or again 3 months, then only they can take a vaccine. So he has mixed up with the two questions. Like how can we suggest them?
No, they can plan a baby if they're absolutely fine. If the saturations and all are good, symptoms have resolved, there's no issues whatsoever with the baby planning and all. And regarding vaccination, see, normally after a bout of COVID, you develop your antibodies, which are actually stronger than the antibodies which are induced with the help of your vaccination. So your natural antibody response is good, which will last you for at least 2 to 3 months. So because there was this study in which they said, okay, people do have good levels of antibodies and sometimes they may last even longer. So ideal duration for getting yourself vaccinated after a bout of COVID will be after 8 to 12 weeks, anytime after that.
Thank you so much, doctor.
Thanks, doctor.
Can I ask a question?
We'll go in for one last question.
Yeah. Can I ask a very quick question, please?
When we are buying these groceries and all these items which are coming from outside, like do we do we have to keep it aside for some hours so that it gets be safer to use?
See, again, this is a very debatable thing because, all the new evidence suggests that usually this droplet, what we mean is the heavier particles which settle down on the surface, that may be anything. So, whether it is the more, it is something which causes more infection or whether it is aerosol. Now, more evidence points towards aerosol. However, keeping it aside for some point of time, if you can, I don't think that should do any harm. Again, how much benefit it gives, I really have no idea because there's no concrete data on that. It's all just speculations.
Thanks, doctor. We'll take one last question. Sandeep, can I go ahead?
Dev Rajan here. So, doctor, one quick question. I know you talked about remdesivir and all the medications. So, one biggest question that comes to all the patients is the treatment plan. I think we have been giving antibiotics and, glutathiones, meropenams and things like that. So, what is the role of antibiotics? Because some doctors say that antibiotics should be started after 10th day, after steroids and things like that. And if there is no clear, data about remdesivir, because I've seen many patients have been doing good after remdesivir, but the second wave. So what would be the ideal treatment, typically in high level, what they should be following it?
See, it all, again, it depends on person to person, okay? Because as I said, not everyone requires steroids, not everyone requires antibiotics. Okay, now if you are somebody with a lot of risk factors, your fever is persistent for more than 5 days, definitely that person has higher chance of getting some co-added infection, some bacterial infection or something. In that case, definitely antibiotics need to be put in, because second thing, if you are to be put on steroids for some reason, your oxygen levels are low, you have to be put on antibiotic to prevent secondary infections. But starting antibiotic for each and every case right at the beginning doesn't make sense, because it's an antibiotic. It works only against bacteria. It doesn't have anything to do with the virus. It won't have any antiviral activity. So starting antibiotics right at day one, especially if you're very mildly symptomatic, you just have fever, it doesn't make sense. And I think that practice over time should be discouraged, because we in India, we do have a tendency of over medicating, over testing and stuff like that.
Thanks, doctor. We'll take one last question.
Yeah, last question. After this vaccination, first dose and second dose are there, since the vaccination is having a stock issue, the second vaccination days, if it is passed, whatever vaccination we take, is it okay that if we take the second vaccination after the expired date, because the vaccines are not available?
Absolutely, you can take. Don't worry about that. See, it's the whole thing is you get vaccination within 10 to 15 days, your antibody response will mount up. At best, what will happen over time if you're not able to take your vaccine, on the scheduled date, is your levels will come down. But if you take the second dose the next time around, again, the whole thing will be. So whenever you get a chance, you take vaccine, even if you passed your scheduled date.
But that will not cause any problem in the body, right? Like your other systems will not get affected with this, right?
Meaning?
Like any body.
You're saying if a vaccine has expired?
No. If second dosage is getting delayed due to
And
the
that's
vaccine
okay. Don't worry
shortage,
about that. It will just have the
will
same
affect
sort of
any side
immune
effects on the
response.
body? Will that start getting some side effects on the body?
No, it's basically not side effects. It will just, your antibodies response may be a little exaggerated at that time, because, earlier once you got so whenever you body is mounting an antibody response, you will have symptoms of mild COVID at that time. So again, if your antibodies levels are dipping down after a scheduled period and then you take it, again, the body has to mount that response. So you may get fever, you may get headaches and all those symptoms which you had the first time. They may be more exaggerated the second time around, may not be also.
But we have to use the same vaccine what we have taken in the first dose?
So far, yes.
Okay.
Thank you, doctor. I think already we are 3 minutes past the timeline that you had given. There are few more questions. I have noted down all the questions. I will share it to you for those which were not answered. You can help us answer, and we will share it to the team here.
Sure.
And also presentation, if you can share me as a PDF, that will be great. We'll share it to the teams. And it was a wonderful session, doctor. We really appreciate. On a very short note, you accepted this. We learned a lot. I would like Shrikant, would you want to add a last note before we close it? Shrikant is the General Secretary for Bengaluru Navanirmana Party.
Hey, it's okay, Lalita. Please carry on. Finish it. And thanks, Dr. Samir, for coming on board. I don't need to come on every call and talk about it.
All right. It was an excellent session, and I hope there were a lot of comments. It was a great session. They want to look at the recording, PDF of the presentation, etc.
Definitely, I can share that. So again, I'm thankful for this opportunity, and I hope this, whatever information I just shared, to some extent, it would have been useful. And I hope, you all can also go out and educate other people who have certain queries and all. So let's help out each and everyone. Let's hope for that. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Thank you, doctor, and appreciate you.
Take care.
Thanks everyone who participated.
Thank you.
Thank you, doctor. Thank you, Lalita.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you, doctor.
Thank you, doctor.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, doctor.
Oh, yeah,